We're going to commence our service before the candle lighting because we don't blow the shofar on Shabbat. So, and when we light candles, that's the official beginning of Shabbat, even if it's earlier in the designated time. So we are really fortunate and being honored to have Joseph Metz here, who has been blowing the shofar with his father in Jackson, Mississippi for the longest time, and he's now moved to our community. You may remember that he was here with his wife and his little girl. And so we are really very fortunate to have Joseph here to, once again, throughout the month of Elul, the shofar was blown as a reminder, as a preparation for the high holy days and the duty, the obligation that we have to do tshuva, which is to turn towards God in a sense of holy introspection. Yeah?
What would you like to say?
Right there. I'm afraid.
The microphone.
Yeah,
Otherwise, really. You're up. Kind of practice, so just give me a minute if it sounds terrible.
Dvarim Truah. We're now going to commence our service with the lighting of the Shabbat candles. Patricia and Iris come forward and commence our service.
O source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law and goodness, help us to find knowledge by wisdom given. Let us take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our life. Let's all enter this sanctuary in need. All brings the offering of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with wisdom, commanding us to kindle the light of Shabbat. Baruch
We now continue with a meditation, an impromptu on a theme of Clara Wieck. Clara Wieck was the wife of Robert Schumann, the great composer, and she herself was a concert pianist as well as a noted composer. She was also a mentor and dear friend of Brahms. We continue with the meditation, the impromptu on a theme of Clara Wieck by her husband, Robert Schumann. Our service continues now on page 124. At the top of the page, we enter the sanctuary. Together, we enter this sanctuary to welcome Shabbat. Within these walls, we sit surrounded by numberless generations. Our ancestors built the synagogue as a visible sign of God's presence in their midst. Throughout our long history and our endless wanderings, it has endured, a beacon of truth, love, and justice for all humanity. Its presence guided our ancestors to lives of righteousness, holding up to them a vision of their truest selves. Now we, in our turn, come into this sanctuary to affirm the sacredness of our lives. May we enter this place in peace. May holiness wrap around us as we cross its threshold. Weariness, doubt, the flaws within our human hearts, the harshness of the weak, let these drop away at the door. In the brightness of Shabbat, let peace settle upon us as we lift our hearts in prayer. We continue now on page 128. We're going to begin with Ela Chanda Levi, which is not in your, it's not here, but the words are very, it's at the bottom of page 129, excuse me, the bottom of page 129, and then we'll go to the Din Nefesh on page 128.
For those of you that have been around for a while, the Ele Hamda Libi won't sound too new because we've done it a few times, and I'll tell him because he won't. But it was written by this person sitting next to me. So I want you to sing along. We're gonna sing it a couple of times. So I think you'll be able to kind of catch on, especially to the first part, since we repeat the same words fairly often.
And we continue now with L'Chadodi on page 138. as we welcome the Sabbath bride. Page 138, we'll do the first two verses, and we rise as we do the very last verse, the Boli Shalom. We continue now with the Chatzikadosh on page 144, and rise for the Baruch Hu on page 146. Verse 144, the Chatzikadosh followed by the Baruch Hu. Yitkana v'yitkana shemei Yalma divrachinu v'yamrit malchut v'chaye ormino v'chaye v'chaye Yisrael Please, my heart, be moved on me. The Hashmei Abba, the Olam Le'amaya, Yitbarach Yishaba, Yitzhar Yituman Yitasei, Yitadar Yitama, Shemei Kudusha, Le'am Avekata V'shirata, T'osbechata Nevata, Davidan Milama, Imru You may be seated. Let us join in prayer on page 148. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the times and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzivaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening. Adonai, Hama'ariv Aravi. El Chai V'Kayam, Tamid Imachaleinu Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai, Hama'ariv Aravi. And let us continue with the Ahavat Olam, everlasting love, on page 150, the prelude to the Shema. Everlasting love, you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai, our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. El Chai V'Kayam, Baruch Atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. El Chai V'Kayam, Alpaf. Ki hem chayenu v'yorech yameinu uvahem nege yomam v'layla v'avatav hasir mimenu le'olamim baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. Please rise for the Shema, page 152.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. בכל לבך וכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלתך בדרך ובשופך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתיכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
You may be seated. We continue now on page 158 with the Mi Hamocha by Helfman. Blessed is said, Adonai redeemed Jacob from a hand stronger than his own. Praised are you, Adonai, for redeeming Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. Before we turn to the prayer Hashkivenu, I wanted to give a little bit of history about this particular prayer, which is found in the Talmud, which was written somewhere between 400 and 700. It's a very, very unique prayer. And I'll explain why it's such a unique prayer. First, if you can just read on your own the English, it's about asking God, because there was a belief back in those times that God actually took the soul of the human being at night, and then in the morning restored it. And so there was always a fear by people that they would not wake up. And so they were always very thankful about having life each day, which is what the Hashkivenu, help us, God, to lie down in peace, to let go of all the troubles that afflicted human beings, and may we arise to life. May we rise up, may we stand up for life. And the constant refrain, the constant essence of this prayer is that God will grant peace to each individual, that being peace in the heart, and to guard us. In those times, there were forces of evil forces at every side. So this was a prayer that's only found at nighttime. It's not included during the daytime, whether it's the Shachrit, the morning service, or in the afternoon service. So why is this prayer significant? This prayer is significant because if you turn back to page 158, the Mi Hamocha, you see at the very end the words Ga'al Yisrael. See that? Redeeming of Israel, the Redeemer redeeming Israel, or who has redeemed Israel. In traditional Judaism, the seminal event of redemption was the crossing of the Red Sea. And that's what all these verses are from. They're from the Song of Moses. So we have the Redeemer of Israel. Now, during the daytime, and particularly in the morning, there is no separation between the Ga'al Yisrael and the Tefillah, which we'll come to after the Vishamru and after the Hashkivenu. The Hashkivenu, once again, is only recited at nighttime and interrupts, comes in between the redemption of Israel and the petitional prayers that will follow when we stand silently and we offer our silent prayers to God. Now, why is that? The reason for that, and there's a structure, there's a theology to the prayer book. They didn't just pick this stuff out of thin air, they gave it a lot of thought. Theologically, what they were trying to do was, just as God had redeemed Israel in history before, we are asking for the same redemption. We are asking God to come and to help us and redeem us, both individually and collectively. That's why you have the silent meditation. So there should be no interruption. So the Jewish law was established long ago that there should be no break, there should be no interruption between the historical redemption of the Red Sea and our own personal redemption. That was the Jewish law at that time, in the time of the Talmud. So they wrestled with this a lot, and they came up with all kinds of reasons in the Talmud that I will not go into as to why this is placed here. But I think, this is just my own theory, is that this was a prayer that was written that resonated for people during those times, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century, when Jews were being dispersed, when Jews living in Israel, at that time Palestine, were under Roman rule, and conditions were very, very tough. And Jews were beginning to be scattered. And there was just concern about not only their own personal lives, but how they were going to continue as a community. And this prayer became central to them and became part of the liturgy at that time, part of how people prayed, because there was no more temple. So this was a prayer, and this prayer can actually be found in the Talmud, almost in its entirety, which goes to show how old this particular prayer is. So when we think of the Hashkivenu, it's the idea that we do not take our lives for granted, that our life every day is a precious gift, and that we live our days in the hope and in the prayer before the redemption that God will watch over us and will give us life each and every day. We continue with the Hashkivenu on page 160. We continue now with the Vishamru. Please rise, page 162.
Shabbat, le doro tamberito lam.
for the Tefillah, Adonai Smatai Tiftach, page 164. We will continue uninterrupted with the Avot and Givrot all the way through page 170. And then at the conclusion of the Atah Kadosh on page 170, we will all continue in our own silent meditations. Silent meditations, either in the prayer book from page 172 to page 180, or just in your own silent devotions to God.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, Adonai. My rock and my
We continue with Shalom Rav on page 178. And after that, we'll conclude the Amidah, or the silent meditation, with the Kaddish Shalom. That is not in your prayer book, but you'll recognize many of the words. We continue with Shalom Rav on page 178.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Ki ata hu melech adon lechol ha'olam v'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה בספר חיים ברכה ושלום, ברכה ושלום ופרנסה טובה, ברכה ושלום נתזכר ונבכה לפניך. אנחנו וכל עמך בית ישראל לחיים טובים ולשלום. ברוך אתה אדוני עושי השלום. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי אבא ויעמד וירח אלוהי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ויומכון ובחיי דרכו בית ישראל עד עליו בזמן קריב ויראו אמן. יש לרב המבורך לעולם עמי עמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה
There's a very interesting passage in this week's Torah portion that we looked at. And it had to do with the insolent and rebellious child who is, at the time of the applicability of this law, the child actually had to be of majority age, had to be an adult. And if the child, according to strict Torahitic law, acted in a way that, to summarize, destroyed the family structure, then that child would be brought before the elders of the town. The trial would be held. If found guilty, the son would be, or the child would be stoned to death, keeping in mind that the ben, the word son, applied only to adults. A child could not be stoned under this law. And we reflected on that greatly because, particularly in light of modern sensibilities, when we look at our children, when we look at our young adults, for example, such a thing would be almost unthinkable for us to act in that way. And I found myself struggling with that particular passage because the flip side of that, and in the majority of cases, in fact, I believe in our tradition, it's recorded that this law was never carried out, that there was not a single case that was ever brought where this happened. And the opposite side, of course, is honoring your father and your mother. It's interesting to note that there's no passage in the entire Tanakh that gives us a way to teach our children other than that we should hearken to the words of Torah, that our speech, that our actions, that the way we conduct ourselves should be a way for us to teach the next generation. And as I've said before, when we use the word Vishinantam Levanacha, you shall teach your children, they're not talking about your actual children. It's understood as the children of the community. So I found myself thinking, well, what does it mean to do the flip side, to not be lazy, to not be wayward, to not be obstinate? And of course, one begins to think immediately of the Kabedet Abicha V'Nacha, of honoring our parents, honoring our ancestors. And we ask ourselves, well, how do we do that? How do we bring honor to our parents, to those who came before us? And it's not by doing exactly as our parents did, but to reflect the very values and essences by which they lived their lives. That is the real essence of honoring your mother and your father. So I'll just use a simple example, and I'll use a more complex one in a moment. So we heard the shofar blowing today by a young man who, together with his father, blew the shofar in Jackson, Mississippi, and obviously blows it quite well, beautifully. It's not as much about the shofar blowing as a mitzvah, right? But there's another mitzvah that's reflected in this young man's act. I hope I'm not embarrassing you. It's an honor to reflect what it was that his father gave to him, and I understand that they would blow the shofar together. And that's a tradition that's been brought here this evening, and we hope and we pray it will be one that we will hear also on Rosh Hashanah. So it has greater significance than just the simple blowing of the shofar. Everyone who's gathered here, we talk, the leadership is concerned about the next generation, having children, right? And it's a valid concern. But there's another way to look at that as well. We are all children. We are all children who are reflecting what our parents gave us. Your attendance to synagogue on a terrible night, or the 23 who have signed in, there's more, of course, because couples have signed in as well. The 23 sign-ins on Zoom, it's more than just coming here to pray. What motivates us, in part, is the memory of our ancestors, of our parents, of what they gave to us. And when we come to the synagogue to pray, we are honoring that memory. We are children, reflecting the best of what our parents gave us. So in some sense, yes, we have chronologically an older congregation, but we have a congregation that's also very young at heart. And that's another way to look at that. And we hope and we pray that the next generation that will come here will carry on that tradition in their own special and their own unique way. Later on this evening, we will hear a Kiddush that was written by a composer by the name of Kurt Weill. How many of you have heard of Kurt Weill? No one. Kurt Weill's father was a cantor, but Kurt Weill had a gift for music, obviously from his father, who was a cantor in Germany at the time, in the early 20th century. And Kurt Weill had a gift for music, and he went to study with some very famous composers, some very famous pianists and so forth. And he composed in Germany. Aware of his Jewish identity, he was also an avid socialist. And he wrote operas with Bertolt Brecht, who was a communist in the late 20s and early 30s. And Kurt Weill had to flee Germany. And he fled Germany and brought his parents with him. And they came to New York City, where Kurt Weill continued to compose and continued to write. And in 1944, he was commissioned by the Park Avenue Synagogue, and he was already interested in his Jewish roots. He was already interested in his father's music as a cantor. And he was trying to figure out ways to incorporate into his music the very music that he heard his father sing as a child. And there I was in my library, in my office, looking through a stack of music that was just put there on the shelf. And much of it we were going to throw away because somebody just put it there. I think it was Rabbi Kaplan, because their synagogue didn't need it anymore. And I was kind of rummaging through. I came across a Kiddush that was written by Kurt Weill. And I did some further research. And it turned out that he consulted with his father in actually composing this Kiddush, which was commissioned by the Park Avenue Synagogue and actually performed in 1946. So he was very close to his father, and though his music was very different from cantorial music, extremely different, he tried to, I think, near the end of his life, to honor his father and to honor the music of his father by composing this composition, which he dedicated to his father. And he dedicated it before his father passed away, and before he passed away in the same year in 1950. So the flip side of the wayward child is the honor that we bring by carrying on the traditions of this 177-year-old temple, generation after generation and generation. And we all promise that we will do everything we can in our power to ensure that this beautiful community will live on for generations to come. Amen. Let us turn now, our service continues now with a meditation of Romance, Opus 11, by indeed Clara Schumann. Before our service continues with the Misha Berach, we want to welcome people on Zoom, just so you have a sense of everybody in the service. They're part of our congregation, of course, and we're just so really excited that people have the option to be able to Zoom into our services and be part of our community. And Shirley, Harold, and Emily Fink, Melville and Odette Sternberg, Jane, Stephen Mulfelder, Ann Zelniker, Priscilla Gold Darby, Diana Cabot, Maggie, Cole and Ellie Appleman, Phyllis Feibelman, Heidi Slavinsky, Miriam Fry, Karen Singh, Milton and Margaret Brown, Martha Adams, Marion Birkin, Ben Bloom and his family, Ronald, we have Annie Lane, and Bailey Myers. We're going to welcome you here, and we really feel your presence. Our service continues now with the Misha Berach on page 371. Thoughts and prayers are Bobby Davis, Matthew McCormick, Paul Bradley, Robin Mayer, Mark Siegel, Rhoda Bennett, Brian Corcoran, Charmaine Mosier, and Elaine Berman. Now turn to the people on Zoom, and please state, if you wish, the name of anyone in need of spiritual and or physical healing.
Dolores Marquez.
Jennifer Sundberg, Jane Longino, and Kathy Hockman.
Julie Adams.
Now turn to the congregation. Start with Moshe family. Yes. Thank you. Robert Cusin. Please rise for the Alenu, page 586.
Alleluia.
You may be seated. This week, we observed the yard sites of Susan Brown Foster, Helen Edelbaum, Benny Friedlander, George Wagenheim, Mary Benenson, Julia Harries Gar, Geraldine Jerry Koffler, Clarice McDaniel, and Sam Schulman. Is there anyone observing a yard site who they wish to remember at this time? Turn to the people on Zoom. In solemn testimony to that unbroken faith which links generations one to another, that all of us rise and join in the recitation of the Kaddish, page 598. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shmei Rabbah, V'alma Dibrachi V'te, V'amikbar V'te, V'chayechon, V'yomechon, V'chayei, V'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala U'bizman Karvim V'imru, Amen. V'hei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Le'olam U'almei Maya, Yitbarach V'yishtabach, V'yitpahar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar V'yitala V'yitala V'shemei V'kudshat V'yirchu, Ve'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shivata, Tushbachata V'nechamata, Da'amiran V'yalma V'imru, Amen. V'hei Shlama Rabbanin Shemaya, V'chayim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru, Amen. Oseh Shalom Ben Romah, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom, Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru, Amen. May God who establishes peace unto the heavens, bring peace and comfort in the hearts of all who mourn, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. Just a few short announcements. To our study, there is a religious school committee meeting on Sunday morning, and on Monday evening there is a board meeting, and that's at 5:30 on Zoom. And then Wednesday courses to our study, and then services next week at 6:15. On Saturday evening, August 28th, beginning at 7 o'clock, there will be Slichot services here. And that's all the announcements I have. Does anybody have anything else on reading out, any public announcements? Like the men's club, thank you. Yes, there's a men's club get together, and this is for young people, particularly the next generation, could really come out and give a hand as to help clean the outside of the temple. We did about maybe half the work last time, and it's really hot out there, and we could use a few more hands. I was there; it was remarkable how much was accomplished by people in the men's club. But if you have a free Sunday, it's a wonderful opportunity to make chidur mitzvah, to beautify the mitzvah of the sanctuary, particularly as Yamim HaNoraim approach, the high holy days. We're going to do something a little bit out of order to conclude our service. We're going to conclude the service with the singing of Kurt Weill's Kiddush that I spoke of during the sermon. But it's a beautiful way to end the service. And so we're going to do the Motzi first. We don't normally do that. Usually the Motzi follows the Kiddush, but we're going to reverse the order just for this evening. Is there anybody that would like to recite the Motzi? Don't all volunteer at one time. Okay.
If you'd like to just stay seated so you can sort of enjoy, I mean, I know it's customary for us to rise, but for this Kiddush, maybe you may want to just stay seated and just enjoy, just listen to this unusual Kiddush. And I want to thank Chris and Molly for, they learned this on the fly beginning yesterday evening. I've had a little bit of a chance to work on it before them. So this is Kurt Weill's Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri hagafen Eloheinu melech haolam Shekiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kadsha b'ahava uvratzon hinkalanu v'zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit ki hu yom tehillah v'mikrei kodesh zecher yetziat Mitzrayim Kivanu v'charta v'yatanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodshecha v'ahava uvratzon hinchazonu Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.